it's Stacey, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to make the rail fence block. Now in the past I've shown you how to make it with 2 rails and also how to make this block when you're making a whole quilt with it. But today I'm just going to show you how to make 1 block with 4 rails, and it is part of my mystery block of the month series, and if you don't know what that is I'll put a link down below as well as the links to my other blocks for the rail fence. But for now, let's get started. To make the rail fence block, you're going to need 4 different fabrics, and for each of the fabrics we're going to cut 4 pieces at 2 inches by 6 inches and 3/4. Now I have added on an extra 1/4 inch to the second measurement here just to give us a bit of grace so that when we've sewn our strips together we can square them off, and that's going to get us a really perfect 12.5 inch squared block. If you're an impeccable sewer, you could actually cut yours at 2 inches by 6.5 inches. If not, and you'd rather have a little bit of wiggle room, stick with me and we'll make them slightly bigger, ending up with a perfect 12.5 inch squared block. You can find the cutting instructions and more details over on my website. I'll put a link down below. Now the first thing we're going to do is sew our A and our B fabric together, and then sew our C and our F fabric together. So let's get going. So before we get sewing, just make sure your fabrics are facing in the order you'd like them to face. For example, if it's a directional fabric, just make sure it's sitting how you want it to face. Then I'm going to take an A and a B fabric, and I'm going to face them right sides together, and I'm going to line up all the edges. So I'm going to line up the top edge here, the side edge and the bottom edge, and when I'm happy I will just pop a pin in the middle. You can use as many pins as you'd like. Well, obviously you wouldn't use a whole heap because there's not a lot of room. You might want to use 2 or just 1 is fine, or you might choose to not use pins at all. So with my sewing machine I'm going to be stitching at stitch length 2. I've checked my stitches. I'm using glide thread today, which is something I'm trying out, and I've got my 1/4 inch foot on. Use whatever 1/4 inch foot you've got, or whatever you use as your guide to get a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to start right on the very edge and then stitch along till I get to the bottom edge here. Just removing the pin as I come to it. And now I'm going to stitch right off the edge. And then I'm going to take my next set. So my A and my B fabric, place it right sides together, line up all the edges, and then when I'm happy I will just pop a pin in. Okay, we can also flip it over on the back and make sure it looks lined up on the back, and then do exactly the same. And I'll repeat that for the last 2 sets. And now I'm going to do exactly the same with my C and my F fabrics, just sewing them together one at a time. So just coming off the very end, cutting my thread, and then I'm just going to snip the thread that's holding them all together. Okay, now let's press. So now I'm just going to take each piece and press it, and I'm pressing it up towards the A fabric and the C fabric. So we'll set those stitches first, which, like the name suggests, sets the stitches into the fabric, making them stronger, and it helps our block sit flatter. Then I'm going to open it up, finger press it. We don't want any creases in here, and then when I'm happy I don't have any creases, I'll press it. And then I'm going to repeat that for all of my pieces. So now I've got the 2 sets that I've sewn together. Now we're going to sew them together. So we want to sew them together so our B and our C fabric are going to be joined. So I'll take a piece each, place them right sides together and do exactly the same. I'm just going to line up all those edges on the top here, on the side and at the bottom. And when I'm happy, I will pop a pin in and then I'll sew just like I did, and I'll do that for all 4 sets. Cutting our thread and then snipping the thread where it's joined again, and then let's just press our sets. So taking my pieces, setting the stitches again, and then I'm going to press towards the B fabric, finger pressing and then pressing, and I'll repeat that for all 4 pieces. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take each of our blocks and square them up so they're 6.5 inches squared. Now they should be measuring 6.5 inches across. So if I line it up on my 0 on my mat, it's coming across at 6.5. But this way it's 6 3/4, remember, so we just have to trim these rough edges. So what I'll do is I'll take my ruler and I'm going to line up the lines on the seams where the fabric's joined. And I'll do that in 2 places. I'm going to line it up on this seam here and the seam here, and that way I know it's really straight. And then I'm just going to cut off a slither on this side. It definitely can't be more than 1/4 inch, especially if you want to trim it on the side as well. So I'm just going to take off a tiny slither. Then I'm going to turn it around. My ruler just happens to be 6.5 inches wide, so that's really handy for me, because that means again I can find the lines on my ruler, line it up with my seams, then I can make sure the edge of my ruler is right on the edge of my block, and then I'm just going to cut the excess off here. If you don't have a 6.5 wide ruler, 6.5 inches wide that is, you could line it up the edge on your mat, find the 6.5 inch line on your mat here, and then you'd line up your ruler on the 6.5 inch mark on your mat. Again, just making sure this ruler is lined up with your seam so it's nice and straight. But seeing as my ruler is 6.5 inches wide, I'm just going to line it up on those seams, line up this edge and trim. Okay, and then I'll repeat that for all 4 blocks. So I'm just trimming my last block now. Just remember that we only need to be cutting off 1/4 inch, so just bear that in mind when you're cutting the first edge off. You really want to make sure it's only just a slither, and then you can cut more off the other side. Okay, let's finish our block off. So I've got my blocks here, and all I'm going to do is place them so they match my diagram. I'm going to start with my A fabric, facing in like this one, and then going around placing them exactly like the diagram. And it also creates this pinwheel look, or windmill. I'm not sure, what would you refer to it as? There we go. Isn't that looking really cute? So do just double check that everything is placed in the correct order. You might want to check that you've got your F fabric on all the outer edges here. Just do a double check before we sew them together. So then I'm going to take these 2 top ones, place them right sides together, and I'll just pop a pin in roughly, and we'll fix that up in a minute, but that just reminds me I'm sewing down this side here. And then I'll do the same for these bottom 2 blocks. Popping a pin in, and now let's sew them together. So I'll take these 2 pieces here, and I can see that my seams are actually underneath, so what I'm going to do is turn it over, take that pin out and line up those edges, but I want to be sewing on this side so I can make sure these seams are all going to be sewn down in the way they were pressed. So all I'm doing is lining up all the edges again on the top, the side and the bottom. And when I'm happy, I will pop a pin in. You can use 1 or 2 or however many you like. Okay, and now I'm just going to sew along that edge just like we have all the other pieces. And then making sure these seams are going to be sitting really nicely. And then I'll just stop, and then I'm going to sew the second piece, and this piece has got all the seams facing me this time. So I'll just remove that pin, line up all those edges and do exactly the same. So cutting my thread and cutting my thread where they're joined, and now let's press. So just setting our stitches again. And then this time we're going to fold up to the solid piece here. So finger pressing and pressing, and we'll do that for both of our pieces. And if you'd like, you could give the whole piece a quick press while we're here. Okay, let's finish off our block. So now I've just got my 2 pieces here, and I've placed them back down, and I've just checked my diagram to make sure they're still in the correct position, and I'm still getting this pinwheel or windmill effect. And then what we're going to do is face them right sides together and sew down this seam here. But the first thing we want to do is find the 2 center seams that are right in the middle, and we're going to nest them. So one seam is folded over and coming this way, one is folded over and coming this way. What we want to do is butt them up together so they can't go any further, and that's called nesting. I'll put a link down below for a video on nesting if you're not sure what I'm talking about. And then once they are nested together, I'm just going to open it up and check that I'm getting a nice straight line there. And when I'm happy, I will pop a pin in. You could use 1 or 2. I'm using 1. Coming in on this side and going across to this side, or you might like to put in 1 this side and 1 this side. Then I'm going to come to the top, line up the top edge and the side edge here. I'll pop another pin in, and then down at the bottom I'll do the same. And then if you'd like, you can just pop another pin in the middle here, and I will just do that. Okay, and then all I'm going to do is sew along that entire edge just like we have all the other seams. I can feel that my seams, the seam was trying to push down. I am just checking as I sew over it that those seams underneath are still sitting in the position I press them in, because we want our block to sit really nice and flat. Trimming our thread, and if you've got any other loose threads, it's a good time to trim them now. Let's give this a final press. So just setting our stitches and then opening it up, and it doesn't matter which way we press it now, but we do just need to make sure that seam's sitting really nice underneath, and giving it a finger press. Oh, it's a little bit fiddly. And then when you're happy, giving it a press. And if you'd like to, you could give the whole block a nice quick press. And there we have our rail fence block. Isn't that pretty? So if you liked this rail fence quilt block video, please hit the like button. I really appreciate it. It just means the algorithm will share it with more people. I just wanted to mention that with that last seam, I did end up pressing it open because I just felt like the block sat a lot nicer and a lot flatter. It's entirely up to you what you choose to do. I'm just letting you know what I did. Now for those last 4 blocks, you're going to need to sew them with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. And a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance is when it's just a few threads in from a 1/4 inch seam. We just want it to be slightly smaller than a regular 1/4 inch seam allowance, so that we will get our perfect 12.5 inch squared block. And remember, if you don't know what my mystery block of the month is, I'll put a link down below so you can check that out. And if you're new here, you might like to check out my double pinwheel block. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.